Hello, everyone. Welcome back to ByteSized Live. I'm Kyler Cheatham, your host today. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to talk about some logistics around supply chain today and how to make sure that your supply chain is really optimized and flexible in kind of these uncertain times that we're working in around how you get raw materials or how you optimize to ensure that you're getting all of the information and parts that you need to ensure your supply chain is effective. So we have Darcy MacClaren joining us today. She's an executive around supply chain globally. She's been with SAP previously and now is kind of helping us on this end to ensure that we understand how to best leverage technology specifically to our supply chain. So before we introduce Darcy and welcome her to the show, I'll just go through a few logistics. So, as you know, if you've been here before, the best part of this show is leveraging our audience questions and your insights. The mission of Bite Size is really to bring that agnostic view or that provider agnostic type of insight that you provide in all of our conversations. So I invite you to drop your questions or insights in the comments wherever you're joining from today. That really helps us kind of bring some flavor and have a very engaged and live conversation today. So we can see your comments, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all the different channels. They all aggregate here and we can see those. So I invite you to put those in the comments. I already see you guys doing it, but if you could just drop where you're joining from today. You know, I like to test those features before we get started. So welcome from Washington. We've got the PNW up early, which we deeply appreciate for you guys this morning. So with that, let's get started in our conversation. So Darcy, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you. If you wouldn't mind just giving a quick intro on your background to the audience today.
Oh, absolutely. And as you mentioned earlier, I've spent over 3 decades in the tech industry as a senior executive. I have a strong focus on building and scaling innovative companies in the supply chain and logistics space. And about 14 years ago, I made the transition to SAP, where I most recently served as Global Chief Revenue Officer for the supply chain team. And now I've come full circle. I have since stepped away from SAP as of April of this year. And now what I do is I work with a select group of private equity and venture capital firms, serving both as an advisor and a board member. So having a lot of fun with that.
Mm-hmm.
But what continues to drive me is really the opportunity to help companies build agile and resilient supply chains. And something that you know is even more critical today than ever before. And achieving that, we'll talk about today, really means aligning the right application, quality structured and unstructured data, AI technologies that work together. And the technology exists today. So now we're at a stage where integration, orchestration, and
Mm-hmm.
scale on a real impact. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly is timely, right, to have this conversation and really understanding, do I need new technology? Do I need new processes? Do I need both? And how do you kind of predict the unpredictable is our current state. And speaking of that, I think a good starting point, Darcy, is just talking about kind of traditional logistics versus today's landscape. So can you give us kind of some insight into how that has changed or evolved over time as far as supply chain strategy?
Yeah, that is a great place to start. And it really has changed. And the change has happened fairly quickly from what I call traditional logistics to today's landscape. I think the first point is that tech-driven logistics is no longer optional, right? Typically, logistics was formed that to be really more cost effective, right, and efficient. And we got really good at that. But now it's changed, so that still is important. That
Mhm.
never goes out of style. But now it's really more about customer service, transparency,
Mhm.
agility, resilience, insights for making better decision. It's productivity and speed. And oh, by the way, there's also has to be the environmental sustainable impact to it all. So it really has changed, and technology is a key component in that.
Mhm.
And I think number one thing we're seeing is the importance of visibility
Yeah.
And then the ability of visibility, not just visibility of itself, but really, do we know what that data point means? Is it
Mhm.
important? Is it not important? Who needs to know? What do we need to do about it? That's what's all changing, and it's changing at a rapid pace that we need to react very quickly.
Absolutely, because we can't fix what we can't see, right? And that's one of the biggest things is a lot of times we go talk about, hey, I have this broken supply chain. I need my magic bullet of technology to fix it. It's like, okay, well, what are we fixing, right? But we don't have that ability to see all of those different spots. So really kind of breaking that down. So before we kind of, get down into the details of that technology, let's talk about the external pressures because we have our circle of influence, right? We have what we can control as a business. But what are some key market external pressures that businesses are really experiencing right now that they need to be aware of?
Yeah, you're right. It's both external and internal.
Mhm,
And the external ones that we see, first and foremost, it's probably global conflict,
mhm,
right? In that you need to be aware in what's going in across the regions that you do business in, that you source from, really has an impact. And then, of course, what we're right in the middle of is regulations and tariffs,
mhm,
right? And they're statutory. So regulations are what tariffs on, tariffs off, keeping track of that, but as well as there's a lot of sustainability and environmental regulations and whether or not you can or cannot import from certain countries. That's moving at a rapid pace. Then we have the race to carbon zero.
mm,
Some of that is regulatory, some of that companies are just as part of their corporate mission more and more. And it's actually becoming now so that there actually can be an ROI to that. I'd say the cost of capital is of utmost importance now.
mhm,
And then you see the logistics bottlenecks that are happening, whether it's the port congestion you need to be aware of. I was on a conversation with a CEO of a logistics company just last week and said, from a security standpoint, actually, um, the port in Los Angeles is becoming less secure than Mexico. That is
mhm.
a big shift. And
Yes.
then we all have the global talent, and global talent is utmost. And you can see a lot of companies going through transformation on the type of talent that they need, and it's different. SAP is one of those that's going
Mhm,
through whole talent transformation.
mhm,
And then you have the AI acceleration. What does that mean, and
mhm.
how do we use it? I think those are kind of the key ones we see externally. And I'm sure there's other we can add, but I think that's kind of the top of the list.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was talking, to a client yesterday when they were trying to go through this and plan through all of these things and what we're planning for is uncertainty, right? Whatever that might be, how can your supply chain be nimble and agile enough to react to a market pressure that you weren't really aware of or you weren't considering? I think that's what we've learned right in the last 5 years is there needs to be options and diversity within that supply chain opportunity. So I'm gonna um, I'm gonna flip to the audience real quick here. Thank you for all of these amazing questions already coming in. They look awesome. We really appreciate it. And so I'm going to use this question from Mick here, Darcy, and talk a little bit about those internal pressures. So if you're listening on our audio version, the question is, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen to supply chain strategy in the last 5 years? And let's talk about this in the lens of internal
Yeah.
pressures. We kind of already talked about the external, but what are some of those internal pressures that you've seen evolve or change in the last 5 years, Darcy?
Yeah, what I see, folks, first of all, in changes internally, what's going on in supply chain is now where supply chain used to be the introverts in the room, they've come front and center. So
Interesting.
you can see now they're actually at the C-suite level in the importance to the organization. So now they're more extrovert, they're more important as far as running it. So organizationally, it's been elevated because of the critical importance in supply chain professionals and executives. And in fact, there's a trend now to actually recruit CEOs from supply chain because they have the visibility of the entire organization. But the other areas that we see changing, and this is a very important one, really it was COVID that pointed out to us The silo approach does not work.
Mhm.
We cannot only be concerned with our own silo. We are all connected. And if we really want to do what's best for our customer, we need to have seamless integration and operability across the entire supply chain.
Mhm.
So, organizationally, what we're seeing now is metrics and things are getting out of silo base. Now,
Mhm.
that's not easy to do, right? Right. So we now see senior leaders realizing they have to have this cross-functional organization, cross-functional metrics, but it takes a little bit longer to say, folks, I'm not just responsible for transportation spend.
Mhm.
I ultimately have to be concerned with my real metric is customer satisfaction and how do I get there? So what we're seeing is from an organizational standpoint, an attempt to break down silos and encourage our organizations to look more holistically
Mhm.
across our silos, but also across entire organizations outside of your own business units. That's a key area that we are seeing. And I'd say the final one we're seeing is actual companies are realizing that we have to have a more strategic approach to our technology and really make sure we're not solving it in a pillar perspective, but solving it in a broader perspective. And a common best of breed was now folks are trying to consolidate and using things to make it a little bit easier to do things that are highly integrated, highly real time, and need to be high connectivity. So you see changes within organizations, but also changes in the technology industry and the importance of partnership and integration to make that all happen. Those are
Mhm.
kind of key areas that I see. And then, of course, the change management that's involved. We talked earlier about the change in talent and what you need in your talent organization. One of the key, I was at a University of Tennessee supply chain summit, and the head of supply chain from Tractor Supply was
Mhm.
there, and the comment that he had was brilliant in that he said, "What we need now, especially with all the disruption in
Mhm.
what's going on in the U.S. about tariffs, no tariffs, and this sort of thing,
Mhm.
and delays, is your planning has to increase. Your
Mhm.
ability to do scenario management has to increase, but just slow down and don't be too reactive,
Yeah.
right? So have all the plans in place, because but don't react too fast,
Yeah.
or you'll just have
Yeah.
more disrupt. I thought that was great to be planned.
Mhm.
Don't react too quickly until
Yeah.
because things are going to settle down. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes the supply chain leadership can be a very lonely place to be in the organization because a lot of times you have to be around that catalyst of not reacting, right? There has to be a mindset of kind of taking that consideration or almost that conscious pause,
That's
if
right.
you will, to say, okay, there's a lot happening, but we need to pause and do the right thing
That's
that
right.
is proactive as opposed to being reactive. And I assume, being an executive yourself, that can be a very difficult skill to learn.
It can be. I'll give you an example. I was working with a large Canadian retailer,
Mhm.
and of course, there are uh, issues and concerns with Canadians and US. And the question came to me is, could you please shut down our sourcing our products from the US? Our
Mhm.
customers don't want to buy that right now.
Mhm.
This was a few 2 months ago. And I said, oh, we can absolutely do that. Boom, done. Nothing's coming in. But let's
Mhm.
stop and pause
Right.
and look at the cost of that,
Mhm.
the timing of that. If you totally cut off getting some produce from California, we're going to shift to Brazil, we can do that. But let's make sure it's a decision based on the total cost, logistics, customer sentiment. Would they pay for the increased cost that's going to
Mhm.
mean? Is it more, and they're complicated decisions before you react to that. Yes, no more sourcing from the US. And same with no more. These are
Mhm.
complicated decisions that are multifaceted. And that's why you need the ability to get all the detailed quantitative information, qualitative information to pull it together and do a lot of analysis. So scenario planning now is very, very important. And the right data coming in, structured and unstructured, to make
Mhm.
those decisions are the utmost importance.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of goes along with this question from Joe. What mindset shifts do leaders need to make to truly modernize supply chain? So this is kind of the opposite, to embrace those visibility or observation dashboards, to embrace those metrics through technology. A lot of times, as you've mentioned, we've seen this huge evolution around what does it mean to be a supply chain leader, which is why, right, we're handpicking CEOs of some of our biggest Fortune 100 companies from the supply chain talent pool. So how do you as a leader really modernize the way that you're thinking about your supply chain?
I think there's a couple of things that you can do. First of all, I always like to make sure you're not chasing a technology, that you have a
Mhm,
real business problem you're trying to solve. And the answer to that is a technology, not, oh, what a great technology, how I can use it. And sometimes with all these fantastic technology folks we have in the industry, they kind of
mhm,
push technology. But it starts with what is our business problem we're trying to solve. When you're educating your team, I think it's really important to do cross company, and board and executives have to be included in this,
mhm,
on the concept of AI. And a lot of companies, best in class, are doing that. What is it? What are its capabilities? What is the governance you have to have? What is the discipline you have? And really have the organization understand these technologies,
mhm,
whether it's AI or whatever it is. Okay. So it really comes through. And then I think it's very important to have people embrace it. The more they understand it, the more
mhm,
they embrace it. So I think it's really important to have them included when you're rolling out a new technology, a new solution, to be a
mhm,
part of that so they understand it. A lot
mhm,
of supply chain stuff can be black box. It's
mhm,
hard to trust a black box if you don't understand the input, the
mhm,
math, and the decision. So what's been very successful is when folks do have the employees really understand what's behind it and see what
mhm,
it's doing, because then they trust it. Because what you need to do is you need to trust the data, the input, the math. The solution is the answer, and to have that visibility. So understanding that really helps to get the embracing. And then finally, you've got to have the right skill set that does have the open mind, right? You do have to have a growth mindset. And that's what a
mhm,
lot of companies are looking for when they're hiring. Do you have a
mhm,
growth mindset? Will you embrace new technology? Can you move at the pace the industry is moving? If
mhm,
you're not, well, then we may have to have, find a better place for you, either internally
mhm,
or externally, if you don't have that growth mindset that's
mhm,
required for the new job. Things are moving at a fast pace.
mhm,
You got to keep up with it. And the ones that do, I think, are the ones that are going to be the next leader. And the final comment I'll make, what I am so impressed with, is the amount of students right now that are graduating from university, the supply chain programs that universities like University of Tennessee, right? They're not just the key ones like
mhm,
University of Tennessee, which is
mhm,
widely known for its stellar
mhm,
program. These students coming out of programs, whether it's a University of Buffalo or it's Lehigh, they're good. And
mhm,
they can be quickly brought into the organization to help kind of have you navigate the
mhm,
experience with the new ones, embrace technology. So I do like mixing tenured people with
mhm.
early talent to give you kind of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, we practice that model here with our relationship and our, lecturing within the university we have here. And some of our top talent has really come from that pipeline by embracing that mixture of senior directors, senior managers with, new students out of the classroom. So there is some, very much some great things happening there. So great questions. Keep them coming here. Let's go to this question here. So this user says, agreed, Darcy, internal metrics need to help break down silos. One way to do that, each link in the chain needs a service metric to the next link, like production schedule, attainment in the factory. And so, in sourcing this as a question, I love this piece of insight. Very, very important. Let's look at what are ways that you can create more of a collaborative supply chain when you're looking at your organization. You've got your leadership, we've got our growth mindset, we know we have to break down silos, but how do we tactically do that?
Yeah, I think the key thing really comes down to the right performance metrics. It
Hmm.
really does. Because if we just say, I need you to all work together, but oh, by the way, I'm going to measure you on your transportation spend,
Hmm.
you're not going to get the behavior you want. You're not. So it has to be a team metric based on the overall efficiency of the entire supply chain. You absolutely do need to have those specific departmental metrics,
Hmm.
but they have to be incorporated into the broader, what is your overall supply chain? What are you trying to do? And I would say you have to have carbon footprint. My recommendation and my corporate citizenness says you got to have that as a metric, whether it's how you're designing your product, manufacturing, sourcing, shipping across the organization. What you're controlling has to have some sort of carbon footprint metric. But the overall key metric for everybody involved in the supply chain is ultimately customer satisfaction in the cost that it got there environmentally. That has to be a key metric in addition to your individual silo metrics, right? Your departmental metrics. That would be my recommendation. You absolutely could have cross functional teams, right, that are responsible for overall. So you have more of a matrix organization where everybody has their department, but in addition, there's cross-functional supply chain that can bring all that together. I
Hmm.
think the good news is the way we're moving, or our goal is to move towards this supply chain orchestration, where it's all tightly coupled, will make that an easier task to do.
Hmm. And what about things, Darcy, like productivity to speed throughout the supply chain, in that understanding that we need to measure that, but again, balance it. We need to minimize waste and use resources effectively, but we also need to be able to be strategic in understanding where these links are. How do you balance that type of strategy?
Oh, that is, it's always the key area of the strategic versus the tactical short
Mhm.
term. And it is hard, right? It is really hard to say, well, this will get me where I need to be for the quarter, right? But strategically, we need to have a little bit longer thinking. And I
Mhm.
don't have a silver bullet for the answer. I will say you're spot on
Mhm.
in that the speed and productivity and having to do everything faster and get the flywheel going is an
Mhm.
initiative of a lot of organizations because things are moving really, really fast. But I would caution that companies have to have a more strategic view.
Mhm.
Supply chain. What's interesting now is in corporate strategy, supply chain has to be a part of that corporate strategy. When you're
Mhm.
identifying the risk of your organization, you have to identify the risk in your supply chain. That
Mhm.
has to be a part of everybody's corporate planning. At the
Mhm.
same time, then you have to have the ability, well, how am I actually going to execute on this in the tactical? And you have to bridge the two together. And there has
Mhm.
to be the balance of what's right strategically for the long term, but in the short term, I got a quarter to close, I got a year to close, and I have
Mhm.
to balance that. So there's no magic bullet, but it has to be a balance of strategically where are you going and execution and how do you do that. And oh, by the way, we're shortening all these cycles, so it has to be done faster. Again, that's where technology comes into
Mhm.
play to give you the strategic look. And then as you refine it when you're in shorter time periods, more tactical down to execution, you have a way to balance that. And you set it
Right.
up strategically, right? So that you can change the levers as you get better information, you get in the short time horizons. Then you have, okay, time crunch. We have to do what we have to do. We can't change much. I can't, get a new contractor manufacturing plant up in this ready. I can't get a
Mhm.
new logistics. I have to react and do the best I can and
Mhm.
execute. And that's how this bridges the strategic, the tactical, and the execution.
And I think that goes really well along with this question. Have seen so many crises. And if you're listening in our audio format, the question is, how do you ensure visibility and coordination across your supply chain during a crisis? And that's something that you kind of talked about, the strategic, the tactical. What happens, Darcy, if your supply chain is having an existential crisis here and we can't really react in a way that we typically would? So one of our suppliers is not able to ship us materials. We need to completely pivot on how we're making something because the pump for our, new convertible isn't here or isn't in the United States or it's blocked by something. How do you, as a supply chain manager, chief supply chain officer, really lead through a crisis?
Yeah. It's all about planning. And the key area is first of all, we've kind of matured so that we no longer single source. And single source means we no longer have one supplier. Now, sometimes that's not possible if it's a rare
Mhm.
mineral, but ideally, we don't single source supplies. We don't have one contract manufacturer. We shouldn't ideally have everything in one geographic region. So we should have what folks are doing is it's all about supply chain risk
Mhm.
and looking. So it's setting it up. You try to have so that we have options,
Mhm.
right, on key things that could totally disrupt our supply chain
Mhm.
and potentially put our business at severe risk, right? So you kind of try to set that up. In addition, what you want to have is I need to have information coming in that helps me to anticipate when these things could happen. And there's all sorts of services, whether it's Everstream that does risk, what's the risk in a geographic area, what's the risk of certain material, what's to help you kind of monitor weather. Okay, it looks like it's going to be a bad hurricane season here. So there's all sorts of tools that you
Mhm.
could bring this information to start having you say, we may be a problem. There may be a labor dispute. There may be union issues, et cetera, to give us a sense. So it's all about this planning, bringing in the information to help guide you. Ultimately, things happen that you cannot anticipate, right? They happen,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Whatever. And so that's where you've done the best you can. And then in the short term, when you're executing, is to have the optimization systems available to say,
Mhm.
okay, what do you have? What do I need to do to maximize my customer sat, the cost, and to serve my customers? Do the best you can do.
Mhm.
And that's where you still have to have supply chain leaders
Yeah.
saying, okay, this is all I have, and ultimately we're gonna have to make some hard decisions, right?
Absolutely.
But the more you can set that up, anticipate, sense, respond, then the less you have the firefighting. So I think as an industry, we've come a long way from the hero where everything was putting out fires and that was all very
Mhm.
reactive and that's kind of what some supply chain leaders thrived on. Now
Mhm.
it's much more thoughtful
Mhm.
and planned. You still are reacting. You will always have that, but
Mhm.
and the technology really helps to make sure it's helping to guide you and ultimately make
Mhm.
those final decisions when the unimaginable happens. Does that
Yeah.
kind of help explain it?
Oh, absolutely. I think that that's perfect. And I think it goes along with what you were talking about of the traits of that supply chain leader, right? Of really looking at it from a standpoint of how are we going to think through this as opposed to freak out and have that trickle down effect through the organization where now there's this disruption in our culture along with us not being able to get a part in there. So as you said, the industry in general, I think breaking down those silos and understanding what supply chain does, because like IT, supply chain used to be kind of this siloed area where we're like, we don't really know what they do down there, but everything seems to be put together and it's all good. Now we're kind of seeing them, as you said, stepping up as a leader on the executive core team. They are a critical member
Yeah,
of
yeah.
that executive leadership team, as opposed to the CIO, right? That we used to see be, oh, they just fix computers. Well, no, now the CIO is a business leader, just as the supply chain management leadership team should be as well. So I think that's a perfect answer.
You know
Um,
what else? You just
yeah,
triggered my thought.
yeah.
In what you see now is because there's so much technology involved required in supply chain,
Mm-hmm,
IT and supply chain, they're two in the box.
mm-hmm,
Okay.
mm-hmm,
To do what you need to do from a technology standpoint and supply chain, you do need strong IT support that understands supply chain. But what also is the trend, where typically a lot of supply chain folks had no use for, let's call it ERP, back end.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now the realization is planning without execution is where the rubber meets the air. Can't
Mm-hmm.
happen. In
Mm-hmm.
this rapid response, we need to be tight with whatever going on in whatever
Mm-hmm.
transactional systems we're running. So it really becomes important that whatever technology that we're using
Mm-hmm.
is real time in sync so that we get the best information from planning and executing, and it's bi-directional
Mm-hmm.
and it's real time. And the
Yes.
AI is going to allow us to go across and really move into agentic AI,
Mm-hmm.
where different agents, a finance agent can talk to a supply chain agent, then can say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to need more headcount, can talk to an HR agent, and you get
Yes.
that agentic collaboration with AI.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what's going to help us move into an autonomous, self-healing, or close to it supply chain. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that kind of thread, picking that up, let's take a step back and look at kind of all of the buzzwords or kind of the hype around this technology in the industry. So we have AI, we have predictive analytics, we have machine learning, we have digital twin, we have IoT. I could go on all day, right? But what are some real examples of these types of technology being utilized that you've seen success with within supply chain management stacks?
I have seen extensive use of every single one of the ones you mentioned: AI, ML, autonomous vehicles, networks, companies. And what's interesting is where you see them most being used because it's easier
Mhm,
is in a greenfield operation
mhm,
where they can build a plant from scratch and a warehouse and logistics to really take advantage of bringing materials in automatically, and have, whether it's a machine where they're doing job shops that are automatically setting the job up, running it through, robots doing it, taking it to a warehouse. I've seen baking companies that totally automate, bring things in, and it's all done based on the planning and the demand and having it come in, right? And that all uses AI and machine learning to do it. And then I think the interesting thing is when you see the robotics in the warehouses,
mhm.
right, are extremely. So if you look at any automotive plant, not any, but like the newer
Right.
ones that are European, BMW,
Mhm,
Mercedes, high robotics that are involved in that. Some of our ports, Port of Hamburg, totally automated. The ones in the US are much further behind in their
mhm,
automation. So you do see a lot of robots in plants now. You see them in warehouses. And where I have seen AI being used, and this is very exciting, is you take trucks coming in with their, could be their 100-page bill of lading, reading that in
mhm,
automatically, updating everything, comparing, here's what's on it, here what's supposed to be on it, their intolerance, right? Making sure doing all the paperwork automatically can save what used to take 30 minutes, take 5 minutes, and it's updated all the systems. Multiply that by the number of trucks you have. It's a huge saving and it's accurate. So
mhm.
everywhere along the way. Now, the one I didn't talk about is networks. And that's kind of where it all starts, is getting all this information
Yeah.
in. So that's an area of real growth. And I would say we're very sophisticated on the supplier end,
Uh-huh.
right? I mean, SAP's Ariba is, this is a
Mhm.
trillion huge network, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Where the other ones are growing is
Mhm.
if you look at the logistics service industry,
Mhm.
there's all sorts of players that are figuring that out, and they all
Mhm.
have different, SAP has one, overall has supply chain security. You have, terminal 49. There's a lot of movement. So that's an area folks should see. The idea is you want to get connected to everything in your ecosystem, and you want to be connected to all your things too,
Mhm.
all your equipment to get information. The one that we didn't see too much of because it was difficult was blockchain.
Mhm.
That was very big a few years ago,
Mhm.
and they were trying to do it, but it really inquires all in. It's used heavily, of course, in finance
Right.
transactions.
Mhm.
Logistics was trying to do it. It, by the way, is back. What was interesting is SAP worked with the U.S. on the vaccine
Mhm.
distribution in the U.S. and other regions.
Mhm.
Blockchain was not used other
Mhm.
secured way because it was too difficult to
Mhm.
implement, get everybody
Mhm.
involved. They did have
Right.
secure ways of checking it, making sure it stayed refrigerated. It was checkpoint here, but that I kind of see coming back now. Um,
Yeah.
but you know what I'm saying? It was very
Oh,
popular,
absolutely.
and then it
Yeah.
was like, what happened to blockchain?
Yeah.
Technology is still there,
Mhm.
and now I think it's coming back. But every single one of these is being used, and they're being used in conjunction with one another. Now, autonomous vehicles and drones,
Mhm.
all sorts of use. We see the
Mhm.
cars in San Francisco and San
Mhm.
Antonio and getting better and better with those. They're still, moderated somewhat by with somebody behind the scenes, but you
Mhm.
have less people doing that than actually driving. So that's an area I think we're going to have a tremendous amount
Mhm.
of growth. So they're all very exciting and being incorporated in. Um, yeah, I could go on and on about that,
I
but
know, I know. It's
I'll
all
stop.
it's
I'll
I
stop.
think it is so exciting, and you're right. What a time to be on the forefront of supply chain management. I think, and I'm interested to hear your feedback. A lot of things that I see in the industry is this hunger for innovation, but it also has to be tempered with the readiness of the organization, especially here in the States. It seems, we definitely struggle with understanding the foundational needs of this type of technology. So maybe speaking to supply chain officers, chief supply chain officers, supply chain leaders right now, what are some things they can do today to ensure that they're ready to leverage this new technology?
Yeah, yeah. I think I said a little bit earlier, it's first of all, you need to start with a clear business problem you're
Mhm.
trying to solve. What doesn't work is when people are trying to test out a technology, they'll do a sandbox, they'll do a pilot, and it goes nowhere because it wasn't needed, right?
Mhm.
So it doesn't get rolled out. So it start with a clear business problem you're trying to solve, right? And then what I'm very big on is to have real transformation, not
Mhm.
incremental, do real
Yeah.
transformation. And that
Mhm.
happens when the technology is an enabler, not the
Mhm.
driver, and
Mhm.
focusing on solving the pain points that matter to your customers and to your operation, right? And then it's really coordinating that with the rest of the organization. I think
Mhm.
that's really key into solving it. And then readying the organization, you also have to make sure that you have the right data and you
Mhm.
have the right governance. And
Mhm.
data, that's the number one thing if you were to
Mhm.
poll folks, what do you need is that our data, our master data is not good. Well, it's a journey, not a
Mhm.
destination.
Yeah.
Right, and
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
always gonna need to be refined and better.
Mhm.
By the way, sometimes these projects help you to refine your data, but you
Exactly.
do have to make sure you've got the right data, right? And you have both structured and unstructured data to do it. But I think it's important is to start solving a business problem, but go in with the mind that you're going to roll it out.
Mhm.
Because if you go in with, we're just gonna test this,
Mhm.
no problem. No, doesn't matter. Did oh well. If you
Yeah.
go and saying we're going to do this, this is why we're going to do this. We did our due diligence. We're doing it with this. We will start small,
Mhm.
but then we scale. I think you will have a higher probability of really getting it out. That and making sure the organization understands this is why we're doing it. This is what
Yes.
it means to us. This is what it means to you. This is the role you will have. It's typical implementation stuff that I know you're very familiar with, and
Hmm.
making sure people understand what you're trying to do, why
Yeah.
you're doing it, how you're doing it, what it means to them, why it's a benefit to them, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes it may not benefit you, but it's overall back to the broader picture. It's good
Hmm.
for the organization. It's good for our customers, and that's why we want to do it. Those are a couple of basic things
Yeah.
that I think is kind of 101 that you need to do when you're rolling out one of these new things. And by the way, if you want to attract top talent, and most
Hmm.
of us do, this helps you get top
Hmm.
talent because they
Yeah.
want to be at companies that are in the forefront of really innovative, because they want, if they're going to be a supply chain practitioner, they
Hmm.
want the right tools they know to do
Yes.
their job. And that's a problem. If you people do that when they interview now, and they'll go, "You're running that?"
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
and they're like, "I don't think so."
No,
Or
thank
you're just going
you.
to be a change agent and get other things in. But it is something you need to be aware of. You want to attract top talent. They're going to look at the technology that you're using, and that they're able to use to do their job.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a great point. And I think that fits well with Mike's question for you here, Darcy. Hey, Darcy, as a fellow supply chain orchestration pioneer, please advise on what the SCOs are, SEOs metrics that wake up leaders beyond their silos. And I think the good part about this question is when you're looking at, say, you're in the middle management supply chain and you're trying to convince your executive team, like, hey, we need this new technology. And they're like, why? Or they may not be as digitally literate as a lot of other executives. What are those metrics that kind of shake them loose to say, whoa, maybe we do need some additional visibility. Maybe we do need some additional applications to support this team.
Yeah, and by the way, visibility, that's one of the hard things to do an ROI on.
Hmm.
It's really hard to say how much better of a job am I going to do because I have the visibility to do it, right? We all know, of course, but saying how much better is tough sometimes if you're doing for a pure ROI in that technology. But what some of the metrics that I would suggest across for supply chain orchestration would have to be, first of all, your ability, your customer service metric for the entire organization, delivering on time, right, at the right price point to the right person, the right time, takes the entire supply chain. So that customer service metric and how you're doing involves everybody, and everybody needs to be aware of it. That in combination to what the overall carbon footprint is of the total supply chain. And that breaks down into, the sourcing, how the sustainable products you have, your manufacturing process, how you're shipping, right? The total has to be taken into
Hmm.
place, because sometimes somebody's going to take a hit to do something, and that could be to improve the customer service. That could be at the cost of the carbon footprint, right? If you're expediting something a different way, right? Or you're manufacturing something. So those are the two keys that I think cross the entire
Hmm.
supply chain, are those two
Hmm.
key metrics. And there's a couple of analyst organizations, Gartner being one,
Hmm.
that do rank overall supply chain across the entire organization.
Hmm.
There's a few of them. ARC is another one that do have the metrics that you can take a look at to see how they overall view, how good is your supply chain.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that outside analysis is really helpful too, because sometimes we can only see what we see within our organization. And a lot of times having those different inputs or just, kind of that analysis baseline done is very, very helpful when putting together a proposal to go to the executive team, to go to the board. You sit on boards. I'm sure you see a lot of
Right.
different presentations to try and get capital for these types of projects. And it can be extremely difficult if you're not able to measure exactly what problem you're trying to solve and give, we'll be able to do X, Y, and Z% more efficiency
Yeah,
in
you're
this
spot
level.
on. And I
Yeah.
also recommend benchmarking not only against your peers, I also recommend take a look at some other industries because what you'll find is certain industries are very good at certain
Mhm.
things. And you can learn from their best practices what they're doing, even though you may be best in class in your industry, you can learn. So you can learn a lot from what retail does,
Mhm.
right? And doing certain things. And consumer companies are so profitable, and life sciences has have to learn
Mhm.
from them. And the high tech industry is a very different industry, but they
Mhm.
have some areas where they're very strong. Nobody does regulatory like a life science. So there's different areas you can also benchmark to say what best practices can we take from an industry that we're not in, but we
Mhm.
might learn from how they do something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, that's a great way to do it. I'm moderating for Solutions Review, an aerospace and defense panel on the 3rd, that you can watch one of these very complex environments go through a transformation. A lot of times when we see that, even if we're not in A&D, it's a great opportunity to
Yeah.
learn from those complex implementations and kind of let that be a lesson to your organization. So we have time for, I think, probably about 2 more questions, but I just want to mention to the audience, as always, when you put your questions in here, whether you're watching kind of at the end of the episode or you're watching the replay, I will always go back in. I will tag Darcy to make sure that she's able to answer these in real time. So definitely keep them coming. So we'll go to one here about AI applications in supply chain specifically. So, are there any favorite AI applications slash problem solved in supply chain? What are some of the most visionary or most practical that you've seen as far as AI in supply chain?
Oh boy. Wow. God, I think about what are because it goes across
I know it's hard.
so many. I think to me, what the real uh, interesting ones are not the individual AI,
Mhm.
an AI that is doing something, you know, automatically writing code, writing, we have a company, iLognet, that automatically writes code to connect things. I think to me, the real brilliance of AI is when they talk to one another, right?
Yeah.
When something comes in, that agentic AI and AIs collaborating with one another,
Mhm.
that to me is like, wow. So
Mhm.
when something comes in that the AI knows, okay, this is out of tolerance, you're going to need to reshift and you're going to need to do this and can collaborate, and then they start learning, okay, when this
Mhm.
happens, this is what we need to do, this
Mhm.
is what you did. Those are the ones. It's the combination of them
Mhm.
working together, working across AI,
Mhm.
learning from all that, and getting better and better and better. And that to me just blows my mind, and because it's all there. Now
Yes.
you need to make that work, you need some certain things in
Mhm.
place,
Oh,
right? That's
absolutely.
what companies are working on,
Yeah.
and you're seeing interesting relationships of companies partnering to make sure they can do that.
Mhm.
So you'll see, SAP has Databricks. They have now
Mhm.
a relationship with Palantir, with
Mhm.
Proclivity, as well as, or they're all doing this so
Mhm.
that they can bring these tools so you get that combined
Mhm.
exponential of bringing them all together. That
Mhm.
is probably the most exciting.
Absolutely. And I think that you touched on something that's really important. I did a video on this on my LinkedIn page that you can find about John Deere's supply chain automation and working with Intel. And the fact that they're working with established vendors is so, so critical. There's so many AI vendors out there, and looking at the ones that have proven implementations in the marketplace in your industry are so, so critical.
So
So just, innovation is great, but making sure that you have that partnership that is established and that they understand the technology that's going on. And mostly you're owning your AI, right? You're not outsourcing it. You're not outsourcing these agentic customizations to an SI that now owns that proprietary information, is going to go sell it to your competitor, right? So you need to understand that that's something that you really need to oversee and have ownership over. So definitely great question. Thank you so much for asking.
Well, you brought up the John Deere. What a fabulous
I know.
innovative company. I work a
Yeah.
lot with Jeff Teal, and what John Deere does with their combines, the sophistication of what that equipment is doing, the data that it's capturing, and what it's doing and sharing, absolutely best in
I
class.
think it's absolutely brilliant. I run to the John Deere booth at a CES, right? That's the one that I always want to see because
Right. So
it,
cool.
I mean, the innovation, it's in, such an established company, but they have proven metrics in their case studies that they openly share. And I
Yes.
think that is such an amazing innovation to the industry in collaboration with their partners. So can't speak enough about that. And let's round out with this question, because I think Howard makes a really good point. It's a nice kind of capstone to our conversation. Hi, Darcy. How important is it for a supply chain to be fully optimized all the way to the last mile delivery?
Well, it's the last mile is important.
Mhm,
And ideally, in an ideal world, which does not exist, we're optimizing at every point. But the reality is things are breaking down in between for all sorts of reasons.
mhm,
So you're never going to be optimization is theoretical. It
mhm,
is. It's math. And it's just like a forecast is always wrong. It is, right? It's forecast. Optimization, you and your organization have to decide your tolerance at each point in the supply chain. I will say this is what's true. In supply chain, you can do everything right or everything wrong, and it has to do with the last mile. So you can have done everything right on time, best in class. If you mess up that last mile and you miss your delivery, all that goodness goes away.
mhm,
Same if you do everything right, and it's gone. The same with you could make up time if you did everything wrong and somehow you get it
mhm.
where it's supposed to be, all good. So it's a trade-off,
Yeah.
right? And that's why you have to look at the whole thing because you could actually, as I said, screw it up but get it there on time. But boy, but at least you have the information to know what did
Mhm,
that cost the organization? What did that cost the environment? Because we weren't as good as we should have been along the way, but
mhm,
ultimately I did it. And organizationally, you have to decide what's most important to your company, right, and your board in making those decisions. That's a great question though,
mhm.
because it always comes up like
Yeah.
how you have to do it. And it's like you can get it there, but getting it there that last mile
Mhm.
is going to be problematic, but we're going to get it there when you need it, when we promised it.
Absolutely. So well said. Great question. Well, thank you so much, Darcy, for sharing all of this amazing insight. And thank you to the audience for these questions. Darcy, if people do have more questions for you or want to follow all of your great insight and thought leadership, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me is just go to on LinkedIn. I'm readily accessible and I will absolutely respond if you want to reach out to me. I look forward to it.
That's excellent. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. This conversation is incredibly insightful, and we could go on for hours in different areas. And maybe, we can have Darcy back to talk more about all of these amazing questions. But I want to thank all of our community for joining us today, for joining this conversation, really bringing that transparency and overall insight to the supply chain management field. It's critically important that we share these types of ideas. I'm Kyler Cheatham. This is ByteSized. You can find us anywhere that you get your podcasts or on YouTube if you want to see our live episodes. We also have our live guests every week on our LinkedIn cast and our YouTube cast. You can reach out to me directly with any feedback from this episode at kyler@theconfluential.com, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. I always love hearing from the audience. The reason we spend our time doing this is to bring value to this community. So with that, thank you to the audience. Thank you, Darcy, for joining us and sharing your amazing insights.